You're listening to episode 55, Dana's Story, Child Life Specialist in the Schools. Hi, and welcome to the Child Life On Call podcast. When your child is sick, the whole world seems to stop in its tracks. Plans and priorities change, and your number one job becomes figuring out how to get your child well again. For some of us, rest, medications, and relaxation can do the trick. But for others, it takes more. It takes countless doctor appointments, invasive medical testing, therapy, surgeries, the list goes on, and then you still may not have all of the answers or results you were hoping for. This podcast features parents of children that have an illness or medical condition and gives them a place to share their own journeys and experiences. We will talk about the ups and the downs, the highs and the lows, but one thing seems to remain the same. Children are resilient and teach us more about ourselves and the world than we could ever imagine. Thank you so much for lending a listening ear and opening up your heart to these families and this podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor. Hello and welcome to the Child Life On Call podcast. I am so happy that you are here today because today is a very special episode. It's a little bit different. We're actually not going to be featuring a parent this time. We're going to be featuring another child life specialist. Her name is Dana, and she is from Louisiana, and she has recently brought child life into the school district in her town. It is so exciting about how she is trailblazing this incredible position within a school district. She gives us the details about her journey in child life up until this point and how she made connections and inevitably got this job within a school district. She talks about her patient load, or I guess her student load. She talks about how she is accepted by other professionals in the school that she works with and some of the interventions that she does. And then she also has great tips about if you are interested in looking into child life in a school district near you, or just expanding services or trying something new. She's got a lot of good takeaways about how if you are a child life specialist, you want to move into the schools. Parents, she also has great insight into actually how kids deal with stress and anxiety in the school. You know, when we're in the hospital, kiddos typically have their parent nearby and you can actually see how your child does. But the school setting is you don't totally get a window in to see how they do when they're stressed. And so she talks about what she's seeing, how kids are handling stress. And she actually has some great tips and techniques that I'm going to start using tomorrow on my kiddo. So I'm so glad you're here today, and I'm so thankful to Dana. Make sure you stay tuned to the end of the episode so you can find out how to follow along with her and her journey. Thanks for being here.
So my name is Dana Burnett, and I am from Indiana, but I now live in Bougier City, Louisiana. I have been here for about a year and a half. So it's all new to me in Louisiana.
Yeah.
And right now I am working for Bougier City Schools. So I go to 11 schools every week. So it's a lot of schools.
Yeah.
And I do child life in the schools.
Oh my gosh, that is so cool. So I have admittedly never talked with a child life specialist who actually works in the school district. So I'm so anxious to ask you a whole bunch of questions and hear about your experience. But why don't you tell us about your path up until now and how you ended up relocating for this position?
Yes. So in 2010, that started my child life journey. In 2009, I graduated from Indiana University with a bachelor's in education. And I realized when I graduated that I did not want to teach in a classroom, but I still wanted to teach children somehow. So I became a nanny in 2010, and the family that I nannied for, the mom was an ENT, and she came home one day and said, "Hey, at my children's hospital, there's this amazing field I think you would love, and it's called child life." So of course, I immediately went home and researched and did all of that. And maybe a month later, I was volunteering in the hospital. So it happened pretty quickly with that. So then in 2012, I moved to Illinois and got into grad school and went to Illinois State for child life. And then graduated in 2014. And I got my first job in child life in 2015. So that was in Indiana, where I'm from. So it was more northern. So it was in South Bend, Indiana. And so it was in PICU and PEDS. It was part-time. I think a lot of child life, we take PRN part-time jobs to kind of get
Mm-hmm.
our foot in the door. You know about that.
Yep.
And so I took that job and I knew it wasn't going to be a full-time job. And so after a few months, I applied to a job in Florida and I moved from Indiana to Florida
Oh my
and lived there
gosh.
for 4 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. I loved the beach. That was my self-care after
Oh,
working at the
totally.
hospital.
Yes.
And so I lived there for 4 years. And during that time, I met my boyfriend, and he lived in Bougier City, Louisiana.
Okay, it's all starting to
You
make
know where this
sense
is
now.
going. And so I ended up quitting my job in 2000. I told them in 2018, and I moved in 2019.
Okay.
So then in 2019, I became a nanny again, kind of looking around for child life jobs. You know, those are hard to get. So
Mm-hmm.
I got a job at Shriners, and which I absolutely love. Their child life team is amazing here at Shreveport, Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
And then I got into a conversation about working in the schools one day, and then it happened.
Okay. So that is so interesting. And I love that you've seen child life from a lot of different avenues. And I first love that you heard about it from a physician because I
Yes.
love when physicians love us, to say the least, because they're such great advocates for us. And so you got to kind of hop around the US. And so tell me about the conversation. Was it with somebody in the hospital who was trying to open up a position so you kind of just naturally went into it, or how did you combine, or how did you get from the conversation to actually working in the schools?
So I was in a conversation with a family that I nannied for. And so I was just talking to them about just an idea about working in schools and how amazing would that be to help those kids that are dealing with illness and grief and working with them outside of the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And so I talked about, when I was in fourth grade, my dad got diagnosed with cancer. And I remember not knowing what cancer was, knowing I didn't know any of that stuff. And he would come home, he came home with no hair and was throwing up. And I didn't know about chemotherapy at that time. And when I got to seventh grade, he ended up passing away. And my family is the type of family that we didn't talk about it. And so thinking about my childhood, I wanted to be able to have kids talk about those experiences because otherwise you're sitting in class, you have all this anxiety, you're worrying about what's going on at home with your family or with yourself. And so I want to help those kids. So we just kind of had a conversation about that. And then I ended up getting in contact with one of their friends that was a former principal. And 4 phone calls later, I ended up on the phone with the lady who is now my boss. She writes curriculum for our area, and she had a grant available for the DoD. And the past, I would say 3 or 4 years, it's been for a school counselor. And so I kind of just proposed my idea of child life and how it varies from a school counselor, but we do have those similarities. And so she asked about it, and I told her exactly what my idea was, and it happened.
I love that. You are like somebody who has an idea, talks about it, shares it with a network, and then you get it done. That is so cool. So I'm so interested to hear what your day to day is like. Your first day on the job, like what was that like? I mean, you essentially kind of had to, we think about the elevator speech in the hospital explaining what we do, but you're in a whole new place that's never even heard of child life at all. So tell me about that transition actually working in the schools.
So yes, that elevator speech, it's a lot. And I get confused oftentimes with a school counselor. And so
Okay.
I'm constantly telling them that I'm not a counselor and that
Mm-hmm.
any of the referrals that I have for behavioral or self-harm or anything like that I can't see because I'm not a counselor. And so I have to make sure I keep those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
But my first day, it was just my first week, I should say. I went into each school and just introduced myself to the school counselors, informed them of what my idea was, what are the students that you know of that could benefit from my services, and kind of just went with that. I've told them that I would like the list of the kids beforehand. That way I can plan my intervention ahead of time. And so that's what I did my first week. And then my second week is when I started working with the kids.
Okay, gotcha. So do you have an office or a classroom? How does the actual intervention work?
I am anywhere where they can have me.
Okay.
So there are some schools I have an office. It's not for me, but it's just an empty office. I have some schools where I'm in a classroom. I'm in the library in a corner. It's child life, it's
Yeah,
flexible and we
for
work with
sure.
what we have.
Yes. And so I guess you show up to a certain school on a certain day and you have scheduled appointments with some of the students there. Is that how it works?
Yes. So I go to 2 schools a day, except on Wednesday I go to 3. And my schedule is back to back to back. I don't have time to plan. I don't have time to think.
Yeah,
I go.
right. And tell me about the population you see. What ages are they, and what are most of the kids that you're seeing dealing with?
The ages are from kindergarten to 8th grade, so about 5 years old to 14. So like I said, I have 10 elementary schools and I have 1 middle school.
Okay.
And the population that I'm working with is I work with children that have a chronic illness or their family member has a chronic illness.
Mm-hmm.
I also work with a lot of grief and loss. So because of my grant is through the DoD, I do work with families that are military. So working with children that have a loss of a deployment right now with a parent. Also with divorce, death, anything that can cause trauma to a child is what I see.
Oh my gosh, they are so lucky to have you. So is this your first, almost the end of your first semester in schools, or have you been doing it for a while?
No, this is probably about my 6th week. So it's
Oh
all
my
somewhat new.
gosh. Wow.
So I'm still finding my way.
And tell me about what kind of charting or dictation do you have to do to document what your interventions are and what your plan is and working with the kids?
So I have a binder that I have tabs for every school. And so it has the child's name, the reason I saw them, what our intervention was, my goals for them. And then that's just for myself. And then for the staff, I send either an email or we have an Excel sheet for each school, and it will list the kid's name and I initial and date it. That way they know who I saw that day. And if there's anything that I need to communicate with them, I will either in person or through email. But other than that, it's a very short email with the staff.
Wow. And how about parents? If anything comes up, the way I see a lot of child life in hospitals is we can either very quickly get a parent assessment before or talk about it after, just that open line of communication. And how are you speaking with parents? Do they have to sign off on a visit from you, or do you ever call them after a meeting and talk about what happened?
I have to have parent approval to see any of the kids. So I do have that. And then I sent home a flyer to each kid, just kind of explaining what I do so that way parents are aware of my role. And in the flyer, it has my email. So I have received a few emails from parents just inquiring more about what I'm doing and how I'm helping their child. And that kind of just starts a conversation as well. That way I know what's going on at home as well.
Yeah. Are you finding that when you're meeting with kids, I'm thinking about the parents that listen to this podcast and, on top of having a chronic illness or dealing with loss or grief, they're having to deal with the stresses of school and test anxiety and wearing masks in a pandemic right now is a whole other level. So I'm wondering, what are you seeing kids doing that's helping them kind of cope with the stress of being in school?
So there's a couple things even this week already, and it's only Monday, that I've been able to see kids doing. Today, there was a kid that they do a timeout time is what they call it. And so for 15 minutes, they get to leave class and they either walk around the building or they sit in the office and color. And because they're having anxiety in class, and so it gets them to be able to walk out and kind of lessen that anxiety before they head back into class. So just something as simple as that I see. And then also, I don't know if you've heard of 5-finger breathing, because I have not heard of this, but apparently it's been around. So there's a lot of kids that do that. So for the listeners that don't know what that is, so if you take your hand and you trace your hand with your other finger, you'll start out with your thumb, and when you go up your thumb, you breathe in, and when you go down your thumb, you breathe out. And then you go up your index finger, you breathe in, and out your index finger, you breathe out. So it's just a calming activity, but you always have it with you. So that's something that I think some of the counselors have taught our children, which seems to really work. And then as far as with test anxiety that you brought up, I've been able to see a couple of the kids have a piece of paper and they block half of the paper with that plain paper. That way they're not overwhelmed with everything on the paper, which is a great idea. I wish I would have done that in school.
Yeah, I think I did that a lot. Maybe even for the Child Life exam. I remember we got a scratch sheet of paper back in the day.
I'm like, this is genius.
Yeah.
So a lot of the kids do that. And then something that I've been trying to teach some of the kids is doing a alphabet activity. So if you are having so much anxiety about tests or about just something you're learning in class right now, look around the classroom and find 2 things in the room that start with the letter A. Then find 2 things that start with the letter B. And hopefully by the time you're to letter M or so, you've kind of been able to lower that anxiety. So that's another thing that you could easily do at any time.
Parents, are you listening? This is genius material. I'm literally going to try this with my son tomorrow during Zoom kindergarten, because I know we're going to have a moment and we are going to do, what do you want to call it? Like I Spy Alphabet or something?
And you can do colors. You can even do colors. 2 things that are green, 2 things that are yellow. I mean,
love it. Okay. You need to trademark that, Dana. That's great.
And then I was going to say, so another thing that I have been doing since it's the holidays, and that causes a lot of stress for a lot of our kids, is I found an activity on Pinterest, which Pinterest is amazing.
Yes.
You can get lost for hours. So I found an activity that is called Coping with Holidays Ornament Activity. So it's a worksheet and it has 5 ornaments on it. And each ornament has the word feeling and then why you have that feeling. So the kids get super excited because they get to see that they just get to color. They don't see what our goal is in that. And so doing this activity, I have been really able to see what worries these kids. So we first start off with what are you excited about Christmas or holidays or anything that's been going on in school? And so they'll write that down. And then I'll try to transition to another feeling, anger, or why have you been sad or worried? And so it really allows them to be able to bring that worry up with us. And for an example, I had a kid tell me in one of her ornaments that she's afraid that this is the last time she'll have her grandma around because her grandma's old. So that allowed that conversation to open up for us. And we ended up ending the session by making her grandma a card. So without having that, I wouldn't have known that information that was going on in her head.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, girl, you have just opened up a whole world for Child Life. How have you been received in the schools? What are the counselors and the teachers and the principals saying?
They've been very, very receptive. Like I said before, it's a lot of educating and letting them know that I'm not a counselor, because some of the referrals, a lot of times, like I said, aren't appropriate.
Right.
But everyone is so inviting, and I get emails from principals, I get emails from the school counselors, like I said, parents. I actually, even from a student last week, she was absent. She was out sick, and I had her parent called the school and asked if I was there, and they said yes. And she said, can she call her because she doesn't want to miss her session?
Wow.
Which I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing.
That is really cool. Oh my gosh, I love it.
Yes.
Oh, and so how about the day-to-day of having to drive to all these places? I'm sure you were just exhausted after 6 weeks of pouring yourself into a new job.
It is exhausting, but it's very rewarding, and I love learning.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of times in child life we get stuck, and especially if we're in the same unit over and over. And
Mm-hmm.
I love trying to find new ways to learn and
Mm-hmm.
keep my learning open. And so this is definitely it, because there are illnesses that I don't know about. There
Mm-hmm.
are grief and loss situations that I've never worked with. And so that's been rewarding. And, you know, I'm just able to learn a lot more.
Right.
As far as the driving, I make sure that my schools are close together. So I never drive more than 20 minutes. But once I get there, my other school is only 2 minutes away. So I'm not driving all over town. All my schools are close together, which helps.
And this is a question that you don't have to answer if you don't feel comfortable and know exact things, but do you feel like the compensation you're making is comparable to that you had in the hospital?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, it
that's good.
definitely is. And I'm pushing actually right now because, like I said, I work on a grant, and my boss and I are working to propose to the school board in February to get my position secured, and that a way that, it stays. And if that happens, I may end up being in than 11 schools and just be on a consult basis only. So
Sure.
that's
Wow.
exciting.
That is so exciting. It sounds like they already need more than one of you.
There, I do think so, because they told me they have over 25 schools, and I'm like, there is no way I can go to
Yeah,
25 schools, just me. So we
that's a
definitely
lot.
need more child life.
What would you say to somebody who is interested in bringing child life to their school district in the city that they live in? Where do they even begin?
I would say first, writing down your goals and writing down your purpose of why you're doing this and what your services would be. That a way you can show whoever you're proposing that idea to. Also, having research. We know that research is what is needed a lot of times. And so, having research of how chronic illness can affect kids and how grief and loss can affect kids. And so just gathering all that research, that way you can have that when you propose the job as well. And I would reach out to all the schools. You may get turned down 20 times. I think the way that I got in was pretty easy, but I don't think that that's very common.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think making those phone calls and not giving up and just trying to get to the right person is what we have to do.
Yeah,
And explaining, what child life is. How many times do we have to explain that in the hospital a day? I mean, it's
right.
constant. And so this field isn't in schools yet. And so we're going to have to explain it a lot.
Wow. My gosh. What have you had any maybe some surprises or unexpected things that have happened that you weren't totally prepared for?
I think the unexpected would be interventions and planning them.
Uh-huh.
I don't know why I was thinking I would have time. That's probably how teachers feel.
Sure.
And I think, in the hospital, we usually have time. If it's an inpatient, we have time to go spend 15 minutes to get this intervention together and then go see the child. I don't have that time. My appointments are back to back to back. So instead, I plan at night. And so it's trying to figure out how can I get my time together where I'm not spending every night planning interventions the night before. So I think that's a big unexpected thing. And then
Mm-hmm.
also planning around enrichments. I didn't think about, I can't take a kid out of math or science. That
Right.
didn't cross my mind. And
Yeah.
so going to the school and knowing that I have to plan with their enrichment, and I may only get 15 minutes with them, but then they have to get back to class. And
Mm-hmm.
so being able to cut that intervention down and knowing that we may have to pick it up next time also.
When do you, so if you meet with a student and you're like, okay, we're going to need to have at least 3 to 6 more sessions, or do you kind of just feel how a session goes and then come up with a plan, or how do you decide how many times you see somebody?
I think it's seeing how it goes and how their concern is going. We most of my kids, I have seen the whole 5 times that I've met with them. There's a couple kids that I may only see twice. It just really depends on their needs and how much time I need with them. Because again, if I'm only getting 15, 20 minutes, but they need a lot of education on their parent having cancer, I need more time with them. And so just seeing how the first one goes can really give me insight on how much time I'm going to spend with them.
Okay, gotcha. Kind of coming up with your treatment plan and all of that. What has been your favorite part about being a child life specialist in the schools?
I would say how excited the kids are to see me.
Yeah.
They, like I said, the one called the school the other day. I have a couple kids that ask me every time I see them, why do I only get to see you on Monday? I want to see you every day.
Aww.
And so just knowing that I am making that impact and even having them repeat back to me what we've learned, it's just really rewarding and amazing to know that this is, helping them be able to focus in school and be able to also focus at home and not have so much stress.
Wow. Are you doing any kind of data collecting as you kind of go through the schools so you can advocate for your position? And are there other child life specialists that you've met in schools who do any kind of data collection and y'all can get together and kind of come up with some information?
I have not personally talked to anyone yet, but I have found a couple on social media that I'm looking to connect with and kind of see what they do for that. I am collecting data as far as how many kids I'm seeing each week. I know last week I saw about 60 kids. So it was a lot of kids and they were all appropriate child life.
Yeah.
So I was really amazed by how fast my numbers are from only being there for 6 weeks.
Wow. I'm in awe. That is so cool. Well, I know parents listening to this too are thinking like, I want my kid to meet with a child life specialist once a week. Like, what a beautiful addition to a work week in a school for a child in a school. Like, you get a little bit of respite with this person that you come to see that's just for there. You don't have to talk about school. You can kind of guide your conversation. It's pretty amazing. Guidance counselors typically have a lot on their plate in terms of having to deal with, I say non-clinical, but what's the word? Administrative type stuff, and having to go speak to all these classrooms. And you really just get this one-on-one time, which is pretty special. And
they have told me that. I've been able to see firsthand, the paperwork they have to do and those presentations they have to do in the classrooms. And they tell me how thankful they are. And I've even had a counselor tell me, I'm so glad you're working with this child on their chronic illness, because I would have no idea how to explain that to them.
Right. Yeah.
And so it's really helpful.
So if people want to follow along with you and your journey and your experiences, is there any place that they can do that and kind of see how it's all going for you?
Yes. So I have an Instagram. It is called Taking Child Life to School. And so they can follow me on there.
Awesome. Well, I will definitely link to that in all the show notes page. And I'm so grateful to you for being here. Thank you for listening to the Child Life On Call podcast. I'm your host, Katie Taylor, and you can follow us at Child Life On Call on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Please rate and review to make it easier for other families to find us. We have cute merch available at www.bonfire.com/store/childlifeoncall, and you can listen to more episodes and find resources at childlifepodcast.com.